A couple of bikers pick on the wrong female Navy commander. Two bikers swaggered into a seaside diner thinking it was just another ordinary morning. They joked and acted cocky, unaware they were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. Because in the corner of the diner, quietly sipping her coffee, was a woman they should never have messed with, a seasoned Navy commander with skills that could take down an entire platoon. What happened next wasn't just a lesson for the two thugs, but the beginning of a series of shocking events, exposing a vast criminal empire. Would they realize who the real predator was before it was too late? Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. Comment your city or country below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow, we'll bring you another inspiring story tailor-made for you. The story begins. Two bikers walked into a seaside diner with the intention of causing trouble. Instead of finding an easy target, they encountered a seasoned Navy commander. What followed exposed a multi-million-dollar smuggling operation, toppling a criminal empire and teaching the Steel Serpent motorcycle gang a brutal lesson. Sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the woman quietly drinking coffee in the corner. They thought they were intimidating a lone woman, but instead, they picked a fight with one of the most decorated naval officers in the history of the United States. This is the story of how two bikers messed with the wrong Navy commander and how their biggest mistake became their last. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The thick morning fog from the sea crept in, shrouding the streets of Port Haven in an eerie veil. Commander Samantha Mitchell sat alone at her usual window table in Mary's Harbor Diner, watching the steam curl from her coffee in lazy swirls. She'd chosen the small coastal town precisely because nothing ever happened here. After 20 years of covert operations and missions that would never make the history books, all she wanted was peace and quiet. Elizabeth Murphy, the silver-haired proprietor who had run the diner for over 3 decades, approached with a fresh pot of coffee. "You're too young to look so weary, dear," she said, filling Samantha's cup. Her warm smile reminded Samantha of her own mother, who had passed away 15 years ago. Little did Elizabeth know the nightmares that still woke Samantha in a cold sweat, or why she always chose a table with a clear view of both exits. The tranquil morning shattered as two motorcycles roared into the parking lot. Their engines were deliberately loud enough to rattle the diner's windows. The other patrons stiffened, conversations dying mid-sentence. Elizabeth's smile faltered as she gripped the coffee pot tighter. Samantha noted the distinctive Steel Serpent insignia on their leather jackets as they dismounted, observing how the other regulars suddenly found their breakfasts intensely fascinating. Jake Rattler Davidson took the lead, his scarred face twisting into what he probably thought was a charming grin as he surveyed the room. His lieutenant, Mike Crusher Peterson, trailed close behind. Both men moved with the exaggerated confidence of bullies who had never faced real resistance. Jake's eyes lingered on Samantha a beat too long before shifting to Elizabeth. "Sweet Elizabeth," Jake called out, his voice carrying an edge that made several patrons wince. "We missed you at the town hall meeting last night." Mayor Thompson was most disappointed. Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly as she set the coffee pot down. "I had inventory to do, Jake. You know that." Sure, Jake replied, stepping closer. "But see, when the mayor calls a meeting, it's not really optional. He's trying to build this town up and he needs everyone's support." His hand slammed down on the counter, making Elizabeth jump. Samantha quietly observed the exchange, her coffee forgotten. With practiced precision, she cataloged every detail. Mike carried a knife in his boot, poorly concealed. Jake's jacket bulged slightly on the left side, an amateur mistake for someone carrying a shoulder holster. Their swagger suggested they were used to using intimidation to get their way, but their sloppy weapons discipline told her they had never faced serious resistance. "Perhaps," Elizabeth said, her voice stronger now, "the mayor should focus on running the town instead of letting criminals dictate policy." The diner went silent. Jake's forced smile vanished. "What did you say to me, old woman?" he growled, reaching across the counter. Samantha moved before her mind could catch up. 20 years of naval command experience surged to the forefront as she seized Jake's wrist, applying precise pressure to nerve clusters that made his fingers twitch and release. "The mayor should do his job," Samantha said softly, but her voice echoed through the hushed diner. Jake tried to yank his hand free, but Samantha's grip was like iron. Mike shifted to flank her, but her attention remained fixed on Jake. "Let me go," Jake snarled, "or my boy here is going to make you regret this." Samantha smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. "Really? Because from where I'm standing, you have 3 options. 1. You and your friend leave right now and we pretend this never happened. 2. You try something stupid and I'll send you both to the ER. Or 3. She applied a fraction more pressure, making Jake wince. We find out how many bones I can break before you hit the floor. You have no idea who you're messing with, Jake spat. Actually, I do, Samantha replied. Jake Rattler Davidson discharged from the Navy in 18. You and the Steel Serpent have been running protection rackets along the coast, but lately you've moved into something bigger. Am I missing anything? Jake's face paled. Mike's hand twitched toward his concealed weapon, but Samantha's voice stopped him. I wouldn't. Your draw is slow and you telegraph your intentions like an amateur. By the time you get your piece out, it'll be over. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Jake raised his empty hands in surrender. Fine, we're leaving. But this isn't over. Samantha released him, stepping back to give them room to leave. Maybe that's up to you. The two bikers retreated, their attempts to look menacing undermined by the way Jake rubbed his wrist. As they mounted their motorcycles, Jake glared back through the window. Who are you? Just someone who's seen enough bullies in her time, Elizabeth murmured as the motorcycles roared away. Samantha settled back into her seat, taking a sip of her now cold coffee. But as she watched the Steel Serpent disappear into the fog, she knew Jake was right about one thing: this wasn't over. She had just painted a target on her back, and if her gut feeling was right, the protection racket was just the tip of the iceberg. The Steel Serpent was part of something much bigger, something that stretched far beyond the small seaside town. Elizabeth placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of her, along with a slice of apple pie. Whatever comes next, the older woman said firmly, you're not alone. Samantha nodded, her mind already racing through scenarios. She had chosen this town for peace, but sometimes peace had to be fought for. And if it was a war the Steel Serpent wanted, they were about to learn why Navy commanders were the last people you wanted to make enemies. No, I'm not alone, and neither are you, not anymore, Samantha agreed softly, pulling out her phone to make a call she had hoped she would never have to make again. Later that evening, Samantha sat in her small apartment above Murphy's Diner, cleaning her Glock 19 with practiced precision. The encounter with the Steel Serpent played over in her mind as she considered her next move. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It's open, she called, not looking up from her work. Sheriff Tom Brody entered, his weathered face etched with concern. Word travels fast in a small town. I hear you had a run-in with Jake and his crew. What word? Samantha replied, reassembling her weapon. I simply had a polite conversation with some patrons who were behaving discourteously. Brody sighed, settling into a chair opposite her. Listen, Commander Mitchell, Samantha, she corrected. I know about your background. When you moved here 6 months ago, I ran a check. 20 years in the Navy, medals galore, clearances so high they're beyond even my executive authorization. Samantha finally looked up, meeting his gaze. Then you know I can handle myself. That's what worries me, Brody said. The Steel Serpent isn't just a local gang anymore. They have connections that run deep. Last month, my deputy found a shipment at the port that should have set off major alarms. Before we could investigate, we got orders from the state to stand down. Sounds like someone's being paid to look the other way, Samantha finished for him. Brody leaned forward, lowering his voice. Mayor Thompson holds meetings at the Steel Serpent's clubhouse. Half the city council drive new cars they can't possibly afford. The Port Authority suddenly has funding for renovation and expansion. I have a daughter, Brody continued. I can't risk it. So you turn a blind eye, Samantha concluded for him. I do what I can without getting my people killed, Brody stood, adjusting his belt. I'm not here to tell you what to do, just to be careful. Jake isn't the real power in the Steel Serpent. His boss, Marcus Richard, is coming to town next week. That man has ties to smuggling operations on 3 continents. Samantha's expression remained neutral, but her mind was racing. Richard was a name she had heard before during her last assignment with Naval Intelligence, an operation that went sideways, costing the lives of 2 of her teammates. Thanks for the heads up, Sheriff, Samantha said. As Brody reached the door, he paused. Besides, Elizabeth Murphy is a good woman. She's been serving coffee and pie in this town since I was a kid. What you did today, well, it was about time someone stood up for her. After Brody left, Samantha pulled out her phone, dialing a number she hadn't used in months. Reynold here. Mike, it's Mitchell. Remember that smuggling operation we were tracking in Singapore? The one where Johnson and Isabella got killed. A beat of silence. The one that went dark? Yeah. I think I found his supply chain. Port Haven? Of all places. Christ, Samantha, shouldn't you be retired? I need everything you can find on Marcus Richard and the Steel Serpent MC, official channels only. I don't want to burn any of your clandestine sources. Mike sighed. Give me 48 hours. And Samantha, be careful. Richard isn't someone you want to tangle with alone. Who said I was alone? Narrating and preparing this story took a lot of time, so if you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The next morning, Samantha was helping Elizabeth open the diner when a group of motorcycles roared past. This time it wasn't the Steel Serpent. Their leathers bore a different insignia. The Iron Wolves. Their leader, a hulking man known as Jackson, caught Samantha's eye as they passed. There was recognition there and something else, a message. Trouble again? Elizabeth asked, her voice worried. Maybe not, Samantha replied. The Iron Wolves were different. Mostly ex-military. They protected their territory but didn't prey on civilians. And if Samantha's gut feeling was right, they could be potential allies. Her phone buzzed. A message from Mike. Data's transferring. Richard is definitely your guy. Coordinates for multiple port facilities already flagged. Local intel also suggests the Iron Wolves MC might be an enemy of your enemy. Samantha smiled. Things were falling into place. The morning rush started to pour in, regulars who had witnessed yesterday's confrontation. They nodded to Samantha with newfound respect. The word had spread. Finally, someone had stood up to the Steel Serpent. Around midday, Deputy Samantha Isabella walked in, heading straight to Samantha's usual table. Something you need to see, she said quietly, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Samantha examined the photos inside. Surveillance shots from the port. Steel Serpent members overseeing cargo containers being moved at night. Professional security teams, not the usual gang muscle. The documents had very official-looking stamps. Last night, Samantha said. And there's this, Isabella continued. They're getting sloppy. Scared. Jake had someone tailing this place, watching you. They're not subtle. Samantha had noticed. 2 Steel Serpent prospects had been parked across the street all morning, trying too hard to look casual. Does your boss know you're showing me this? Samantha asked. Samantha Isabella gave a wry smile. Tom's a good man, but he's scared. I'm tired of watching these thugs tear our town apart. Elizabeth was there for me when my mom passed, making sure I had a hot meal and a place to do my homework. I've got her back, just like you do. Samantha studied the young deputy. There was steel in her spine, fire in her eyes. Another potential ally. Be careful, Samantha cautioned. If they realize you're helping me. I can handle myself, Isabella replied, and I'm not the only one who's had enough. As if on cue, the rumble of motorcycles grew closer. The Iron Wolves were back, this time pulling into the diner's parking lot. Jackson dismounted first, his massive frame filling the doorway as he stepped inside. His eyes scanned the room before settling on Samantha. Mind if we join you? He asked, his voice a low growl. Deputy Isabella stiffened, but Samantha nodded as Jackson and 3 of his officers slid into the booth. Elizabeth appeared with coffee, seemingly unfazed by the newcomers. I hear you had some words with Jake, Jackson said after Elizabeth left. That guy has a reputation for holding grudges. Is that why you're here, to warn me? Samantha asked. Jackson chuckled. No, ma'am. We're here because the Steel Serpent is moving contraband through our territory without our permission. Big weapons. The kind that kill a lot of people. He glanced at Martinez, who remained standing. We thought you might be interested in a conversation about mutual interests. Samantha leaned back, studying the bikers. Their posture, the way they moved, spoke of military background. And unlike the Steel Serpent, they met her gaze with respect, not defiance. I'm listening, Samantha said. Jackson glanced at Deputy Martinez again. Deputy Isabella stays, Samantha said firmly. She's part of this. Fair enough, Jackson leaned forward. Richard is coming to oversee a big shipment, something so big it's got Jake running scared. We have intel, manpower, and motive. What we need is someone who knows how to run an operation like this. Someone with Navy training. Jackson's voice softened slightly. Word gets around. Small community, military, rumors. I knew Johnson. He was a good man. The mention of her fallen teammate hung in the air for a moment. After a pause, Samantha spoke. If we do this, we do it my way. Clean, precise, by the book. No cowboy stuff. Wouldn't have it any other way, Jackson replied. Commander. As the Iron Wolves left, Isabella let out a breath she had been holding. You sure about this? Samantha watched the bikers mount their motorcycles through the window. The 2 Steel Serpent prospects across the street were frantically making phone calls. No, she admitted, but sometimes you have to work with the devil you know to take down the devil you don't. The pieces were moving into place. Richard was coming, bringing whatever operation had Jake so worried. The Iron Wolves were on board, and Isabella represented a potential link to legitimate law enforcement. Now all Samantha needed was a plan that didn't get everyone killed. Night had fallen over the small seaside town when Samantha's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Mike. She opened the file to find detailed satellite images of 3 locations around the port. Warehouses registered to shell companies but clearly serving as steel serpent storage facilities. A knock on the door interrupted her analysis. Elizabeth stood there, looking worried but determined. "You have visitors," Elizabeth whispered. "In the back alley. They say they're friends of yours." Samantha grabbed her Glock, following Elizabeth down the back stairs. In the darkened alley, she found Jackson and his sergeant along with a surprise figure, Sheriff Cooper. "We have a problem," Brody said without preamble. "Richard isn't just coming for a routine inspection. He's moving his entire operation here permanently." "Why?" Samantha asked, though she already pieced together the clues. Jackson spoke. "Port Haven is perfect. Secluded, local government easily controlled, easy access to shipping lanes. But that's not the real reason." He handed Samantha a folder. "Our contacts intercepted these guys arriving at the private airfield outside of town. The surveillance photos showed familiar faces. Members of the same smuggling network Samantha had encountered in Singapore, the operation that had gone sideways. They're consolidating," Samantha murmured, using the steel serpent as a front for a major distribution hub. "It gets worse," Brody added. "Mayor Thompson has called an emergency council meeting tonight. They're voting to cut the police budget by 60%. I'll have to lay off half my deputies, including Martinez." "Clearing the board," Samantha concluded, ensuring no official resistance. Jackson nodded grimly. "Richard arrives in 3 days. Jake's crew has been beefing up security. Whatever they're planning is big." Samantha studied the photos again. "They'll expect trouble from law enforcement, maybe rival gangs, but they won't be looking for a naval intelligence operation." "Not exactly," Brody corrected. Jackson smirked. "Half my crew are ex-Rangers, Special Forces, Marine Recon, even a few Delta guys. We've been keeping quiet, maintaining our cover as just another MC, but we have training." Samantha raised an eyebrow. "A motorcycle club full of former Special Operations personnel? Somebody has to watch out for the little guy," Jackson replied. "We've been tracking Richard for months, gathering intel, but we need someone with your specific experience to pull it all together." The back door opened and Isabella stepped out, still in her deputy uniform. "We have movement." 3 steel serpent trucks just left their compound, heading towards the warehouse district. "They're moving assets," Samantha said, consolidating their valuables where they can better protect them. She turned to Cooper. "Sheriff, I know you're trying to protect your people, but we're going to need some official cover for this." Brody let out a heavy sigh. "What do you have in mind?" "I need Isabella and any deputies you absolutely trust to conduct some selective enforcement. Traffic stops, license checks, anything to slow their movements and gather intel. They'll complain to Thompson," Brody warned. "Let them. It'll make them sloppy, paranoid." She turned to Jackson. "I need your people to start testing their security. Nothing overt, just enough to make them look in the wrong direction." Jackson grinned. "Already started. My boys ran a few bikes through their checkpoints earlier, got them all riled up about potential rivals moving in." "Good. They'll expect gang war. They won't be looking for a surgical strike." Samantha pulled out her phone, showing them Mike's satellite images. "We have 3 days to map their security, identify weak points, and set up for the main event." "And what exactly is the main event?" Isabella asked. "We're going to let Richard set up his operation exactly as planned," Samantha replied. "Let him bring in his international contacts, his whole network." Samantha gave a cold smile. "And then we're going to take them all down at once." "But we're going to need one more piece of the puzzle," Brody said. "Which is?" Samantha asked. "Proof," Brody replied. "Enough to bypass Thompson and go straight to the feds. The kind of proof that makes even corrupt politicians run for cover." Elizabeth, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "I can help with that. This diner has been here for 40 years, Elizabeth continued. "Everyone comes through here, even the ones who think they're too important to be seen in a place like this. And everyone talks." Samantha looked at the older woman with newfound respect. "You've been keeping track? Names, dates, conversations?" "I may be just a diner owner, but I'm not stupid," Elizabeth replied. "I knew someday someone would need to know what really goes on in this town." Elizabeth pulled out a worn leather-bound notebook from her apron pocket. 9 years of records. Everything from Thompson's first meeting with the steel serpent to which council members started living beyond their means. Jackson let out a low whistle. "Ma'am, maybe you're the most dangerous one here. Regroup here tomorrow night," Samantha instructed. "Jackson, bring your best people." Sheriff, you'll need everything Elizabeth has gathered, plus anything your deputies can legally collect. We only get one shot at this. As the group dispersed, Elizabeth touched Samantha's arm. You're not just doing this for the town, are you? This is personal. Samantha thought of her fallen teammates, of the operation that had gone sideways. Sometimes personal motivation just means you'll work harder to make it right. In her apartment, Samantha spread out the intel, starting to form a plan. Richard had no idea he was walking into a trap 3 years in the making. He thought he was expanding his empire, but he was really walking into a sniper's crosshairs. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mike. Satellites are showing increased movement. Whatever they're planning is big. Watch yourself. Samantha sent back a simple reply. Don't worry. We'll be ready for them this time. The next morning brought a flurry of activity across the town. Isabella and the remaining trusted deputies conducted strategic traffic stops on Steel Serpent vehicles, while Iron Wolves members made their presence known through carefully orchestrated rides through the gang's territory. Samantha sat in her usual spot in Murphy's diner, watching Jake and his 2 lieutenants arguing heatedly across the street. Their frustration was visible even from a distance. Your coffee's getting cold, Elizabeth said, sliding into the booth across from her. She placed her worn notebook on the table. This is everything I have on Thompson and his cronies. 10 years of records, conversations, meetings that never should have happened. Samantha flipped through the pages, her expression hardening. Elizabeth, this isn't just weapons smuggling. They've been laundering money through half the businesses in town. Why do you think I started keeping track? Elizabeth replied. My husband, God rest his soul, always said knowledge is power. When he passed and they started pressuring me to sell the diner, I knew I needed insurance. A commotion outside drew their attention. Jake was shoving one of his men against a wall, clearly furious. The pressure was getting to them. Samantha's expression turned grim as her phone buzzed. A message from Jackson. Shipment secured. Meet at the old cannery. I have to go, Samantha told Elizabeth. Be vigilant. Things are going to get worse before they get better. The abandoned cannery sat on the outskirts of town. Its rusting equipment served as silent sentinels. Samantha found Jackson and his core team waiting inside along with an unexpected guest, a Steel Serpent prospect tied up and gagged. Found him snooping around our territory, Jackson explained. Thought he might have something interesting to share. Samantha approached the terrified prospect. She recognized him. One of the newer recruits, barely old enough to drink. What's your name? She asked. Tommy, he stammered after Jackson removed the gag. All right, Tommy, let's talk about the shipment Richard is bringing, Samantha said. Tommy's eyes widened. I don't know anything about. Don't lie, Samantha cut him off. You're wearing a prospect's jacket, which means you do the grunt work, the loading, unloading, the guarding. You know things. The question is whether you're willing to share them, or do we have to get more creative? The young man swallowed hard. They'll kill me. Kid, Jackson growled, what do you think they'll do when they find out you got caught in our territory? Tommy broke. The words tumbled out. Shipping schedules, guard rotations, the layout of the compound, but it was his last piece of information that made Samantha's blood run cold. They have some kind of list, he said, his voice trembling. Names, locations. Richard is bringing it personally. Jake said it's worth more than all the weapons combined. Samantha and Jackson exchanged a look. Such a list could expose the entire smuggling network or reveal every corrupt official on Richard's payroll. One more thing, Tommy added, his voice shaking. They know someone's working against them. Jake's called in reinforcements, professionals, not just bikers. Samantha's phone buzzed again. A message from Martinez, we have a problem. Thompson just suspended Cooper, appointed Jake's younger brother as acting sheriff. Get him somewhere safe, Samantha told Jackson, nodding towards Tommy. He might be useful later. Back at the diner, Samantha found Isabella waiting with Brody and Elizabeth. The former sheriff looked defeated. They're moving faster than we anticipated, Brody said. Thompson's calling it a routine administrative review, but we all know what this means. They're consolidating power before Richard arrives. Isabella added, my badge probably won't be worth anything by morning. Samantha weighed their options. With Brody sidelined and legitimate law enforcement compromised, they had lost their official cover. Her phone buzzed again. Mike, satellites are showing major movement. Multiple vehicles converging on your location. Professional operators, not gang members. Watch yourself. As if on cue, 3 black SUVs with tinted windows rolled slowly past the diner. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore, Isabella muttered. They don't have to be, Samantha replied. They think they own this town. That makes them confident. Confidence makes them sloppy. Elizabeth watched the SUVs disappear around the corner. What do we do now? We changed the plan, Samantha said firmly. They're expecting resistance from law enforcement or rival gangs, so we give them exactly what they're looking for while we hit them from a direction they'd never expect. The Iron Wolves? Brody asked. Part of it, but we have another ace to play. Samantha pulled out her phone, dialing Mike. Remember the favor you owe me? I need real-time satellite coverage and I need you to make some calls. It's time to wake up some old ghosts. As night fell over the town, more black SUVs arrived, professional mercenaries mingling with Steel Serpent members setting up checkpoints and patrol routes. They were preparing for war, but they were preparing for the wrong kind of war. In the basement of Murphy's Diner, Samantha outlined the revised plan to her core team. The Iron Wolves would play their part, making noise and drawing attention. Isabella and Brody would work their remaining law enforcement contacts. Elizabeth's evidence would be their insurance policy. But the real operation would come from the shadows, carried out by those who specialized in the impossible. Tomorrow, Samantha told them, Richard arrives with his precious list and his international connections. He expects to find a town under his complete control. Instead, he's going to learn what happens when you underestimate the wrong people. Outside, thunder rumbled across the bay. A storm was coming to Port Haven. When it was over, nothing would be the same. Samantha's phone lit up with a series of encrypted messages. The first was from Mike, Ghost Team activated. 6 operators, all former teammates. They're yours if you want them. The second message was from an unknown number, Commander, Ghost Team lead here. Team is in position, awaiting your orders. The third was from Jackson. My people are reporting Richard's advanced team is scouting. They're thorough, professional. This isn't your average muscle. Samantha gathered her team closer. Listen carefully. What I'm about to say doesn't leave this room. In about 6 hours, Richard and his people are going to attempt what they think is a perfect takeover of this town. They have numbers, weapons, and the tactical advantage. What they don't have is an understanding of who they're really fighting. She spread out a detailed map of Port Haven. They're watching the streets, the obvious approaches. They have eyes on law enforcement, the Iron Wolves, anyone they think might resist. But they're not watching the shadows, and that's where we're going to hurt them. The Ghost Team? Isabella said quietly. They're real? Samantha nodded. 6 operators, all former special forces who owe me favors, who know how to move without being seen. They've been in position since yesterday, mapping patrol routes, identifying weak points. Brody studied the map. Even with them, we're still outnumbered. Numbers don't win wars, Samantha replied. Positioning, timing, and initiative do. Besides, we're not looking to win a straight-up fight. Elizabeth spread out her notebook. I've marked every business they're using to launder money, every warehouse where they're stashing contraband. If we hit them all at once, it'll create chaos, Jackson finished. They won't know where to focus their response. Samantha's phone buzzed again. Mike, final satellite pass shows Richard's convoy is moving. Heavy vehicles, tight security. ETA is 6 o'clock. Perfect, Samantha said. That gives us 5 hours to get everything in place. Jackson, prep your people. Martinez, Cooper, coordinate with the Ghost Team's recon. Elizabeth. I know, the older woman smiled. Stay out of sight and let the professionals do their work. Samantha said. I need you to open the diner at your regular time, act normal. Richard's people will be watching. If anything is off, they'll know something's wrong. Elizabeth straightened her apron. Honey, I've been serving coffee to criminals for years while gathering evidence against them. I think I can handle one more morning. Outside, thunder rumbled as Samantha checked her weapons one last time. Remember, she told her team, we're not just defending, we're hunting. These people came into our house thinking we're easy prey. Let's show them what happens when the hunter becomes the hunted. The rain intensified as the opposing operators moved through the darkened streets. Their night vision equipment gave them confidence, but Samantha knew it would also be their weakness. They were seeing through a digital green haze, while her people knew every shadow intimately. Ghost Team lead, status report, Samantha whispered into her radio. First team moving into the kill zone. 20 operators moving in groups of 4, heavy weapons, breaching equipment. Jackson, Iron Wolves in position, ready to create chaos on my command. Samantha watched through her scope as the opposing team's vanguard approached Murphy's Diner. They moved well, covering angles, checking blind spots, professional, dangerous, but predictable. Execute Phase 2, she ordered. Across town, the Iron Wolves roared to life, their motorcycles thundering through the streets in a seemingly panicked exodus. The opposing operators reacted exactly as trained, splitting their forces to investigate the new threat. Ghost Team 2 reports second convoy moving to intercept the bikers, Jackson announced. Martinez, from his position at the old sheriff's office, activated the prepared devices. Strategic transformers blew, plunging sections of the town into darkness while illuminating others. The enemy's night vision equipment suddenly became a liability as they dealt with the rapidly changing light conditions. Multiple targets disoriented, Jackson said. Ghost Team 3 confirmed moving to engage. The first shots were silent, suppressed weapons taking out key targets in the enemy's command structure. By the time they realized they were under attack, the Ghost Team had melted back into the shadows, repositioning. Commander, Mike's voice crackled in her ear. The third convoy is holding back their commander. Smart. He's realized something's wrong. Good, Samantha replied. That's what the package is for. On cue, she transmitted a burst of encrypted data, a false manifest from a location near the center of town. As expected, the enemy's electronic warfare team took the bait. They're moving, Jackson reported. All units are converging on the signal source. Samantha gave a grim smile. Phase 3, all units execute as planned. The storm above provided perfect cover as the real battle began. The Iron Wolves abandoned their decoy run, instead launching coordinated strikes on the enemy's vehicles. The Ghost Team operators took down anyone attempting to call for reinforcements or establish a command post. But it was the townspeople who proved most effective. Every door that looked like an escape led to a prepared ambush. Every shadow concealed a defender who knew exactly where to shoot. The opposing operators found themselves fighting phantoms, never able to establish control or regroup. Commander, Jackson's voice was tight with controlled excitement. They're falling back to pre-established rally points. No, Samantha ordered. They're falling back to where we want them to be. The false manifest data had led them straight into the town's old warehouse district, a maze of buildings rigged with motion sensors and prepared firing positions. As the opposing operators sought shelter, they found themselves funneled into ever smaller spaces. Ghost Team status, Jackson reported. 15 targets neutralized, 20 plus wounded, the rest are bottled up in the warehouse district. Samantha switched channels. Mike, what's the third convoy doing? Finally moving, Mike replied. Their commander must have realized his vanguard teams were getting wiped out. Perfect, Samantha said. Martinez, initiate the final sequence. The remaining streetlights went out completely, plunging the town into absolute darkness. The storm above intensified, rain pouring down in sheets as lightning split the sky. Through her thermal scope, Samantha watched the remaining enemy force consolidate in the warehouses. Their training taught them to consolidate, establish a defensive position, but instead they were doing exactly what she had planned, concentrating in one location. All units be advised, Phase 4 is in effect. I repeat, Phase 4 is weapons-free. The remaining opposing operators never saw it coming. The Ghost Team snipers took out their leadership. The Iron Wolves cut off their escape routes, and the townspeople, led by Brody and Isabella, maintained a constant barrage, keeping them pinned down. But it was Samantha who delivered the final blow. Moving through the rain like a wraith, she approached the main warehouse where the opposing commander had set up his last stand. The one who had led the third convoy, the one who had held back, thinking he was smarter than the rest. It was time to show him how wrong he was. All units hold position, she ordered. This one's personal. Lightning flashed again as Samantha moved towards the warehouse entrance. The real fight was about to begin. The lightning illuminated the warehouse interior as Samantha moved silently through the shadows. Her thermal scope showed 6 heat signatures on the upper level. The opposing commander and his remaining elite team. Ghost Team lead, maintain overwatch, she whispered. No one leaves this building. Roger that, Commander. We've got you covered, Jackson replied. The warehouse floor was a maze of old machinery and containers, perfect cover, but also perfect for an ambush. Samantha could hear the opposing team communicating in hushed whispers. Their voices carried a familiar cadence. Former special ops, she realized. Navy SEALs turned mercenaries. Commander Mike's voice crackled in her ear. Confirmed our intel on their leader. Marcus Reaper Richard. He was at Singapore. Samantha's blood ran cold. Richard had been there the day her teammates died, working for a different contractor. He had disappeared before anyone could question his role in the operation's failure. So it is Richard, his voice echoed through the warehouse. Commander Mitchell, you're a legend. It's been a long time since Singapore. Not long enough, Reaper. You know why we're here. Hand over the list and maybe some of these townspeople will survive the night. Samantha shifted between the shadows, changing positions, remaining unseen. Still hiding behind civilian casualties, Richard, just like Singapore, Samantha said. A volley of gunfire answered her, the bullets hitting where she had been standing moments before. These weren't random shots. Richard's team was trying to funnel her into a kill zone. Singapore was business, Richard called out just like this. You really think your little town can stand up to what's coming? The Steel Serpent is just the beginning. Ghost Team status, Samantha whispered, other forces contained and neutralized. Iron Wolves are cleaning up. You're the only targets left in the building. Hear that, Reaper? Samantha replied. Your reinforcements aren't coming. More gunfire, this time more controlled. They were getting desperate, making mistakes. 2 operators moved to flank her position, but Samantha had vanished. Don't you see, Richard? His voice was closer now. The Steel Serpent isn't the head of the snake, we are. That list contains everything, every operation, every deal, every hired killer. With that data, we control everything. Wrong, Samantha replied, her voice echoing. You don't control anything, not anymore. She triggered the devices Isabella had planted earlier. Stun grenades went off on the upper level, followed by smoke grenades. The enemy's night vision equipment went from bad to worse than useless as the warehouse was filled with disorienting light and smoke. Ghost Team, outside threats are negative, Commander Jackson reported. Building is secure, no reinforcements approaching. Samantha moved upstairs, using the chaos to her advantage. The first operator never saw her coming. A swift strike to the throat, another to the temple, silent, efficient. The second operator tried to call for help but only got static. The town's radio jammers were still active, cutting off all communication. It's over, Reaper, Samantha called out. Your men are dead or captured. Your operation has failed. Surrender, just like your team did in Singapore. The taunt was meant to anger him, to make him sloppy. Instead, it brought perfect clarity. Through the smoke and flashing lights, Samantha moved like a phantom. The third and fourth operators fell from precise shots. The fifth tried to get off a burst before Samantha's knife found his throat. Then there was only her and Richard. You know what your problem is, Mitchell? His voice was behind her. You still think like a sailor, honor, duty, protecting the innocent. The world doesn't work that way anymore. You're wrong, Samantha turned to face him. That's exactly how it works. You just forgot they moved at the same time. Richard was good, one of the best. His strikes were precise, powerful, but Samantha had something he didn't, a reason to win that went beyond money or power. The fight was brutal and close quarters. Bone broke, blood flowed. Richard landed a solid blow to her ribs, but Samantha endured it, countering with a strike that shattered his kneecap. Ghost Team status, she managed between breaths, all secure, Commander. Let's finish this. As Richard staggered, Samantha saw her chance, the same move she had used countless times in training, the move they taught every sailor. This is for Singapore, she said and struck. Richard's eyes widened as he fell, his last words barely a whisper. You have no idea what you've done. Samantha stood over him, breathing heavily. Actually, I do, she said. Mike, uploading now, Samantha said into her radio, standing over Richard's unconscious form. The real list was downloaded from their server while they were chasing our decoy. Every name, every operation is now being transmitted to every major intelligence agency worldwide. The storm outside had finally passed. Dawn was breaking over Port Haven. Through her thermal scope, Samantha could see the remainder of Richard's team being rounded up by the Ghost Team operators and the Iron Wolves. The Steel Serpent members who hadn't fled were surrendering, realizing their protection had evaporated. The Ghost Team leader's voice came over her radio. We've secured the port facilities. Found something interesting. Shipping manifests, bank records, political bribes. This goes way beyond weapons smuggling. Samantha moved to Richard, cuffing his hands behind his back. Deep into the state level, at least, maybe higher. Richard hadn't lied about one thing, this was bigger than the Steel Serpent. Isabella's voice joined the channel. Samantha, we have movement at City Hall. Thompson and half the council are trying to leave town. Brody's team has them detained. Keep them there. The FBI will want to talk to them, Samantha ordered. Samantha checked her radio again. Jackson, what's the situation on the streets clean sweep? My boys are running security with the remaining deputies. The town is on lockdown tight, no one in or out that we don't know about. Samantha swept the warehouse one last time, gathering any intel they might have missed. In Richard's jacket, she found a phone with multiple encrypted channels and a small notebook filled with codes, more evidence for the federal authorities to decipher. Elizabeth's voice crackled unexpectedly over the radio. They had given her a backup unit to keep in contact. Honey, you might want to get back to the diner. We have visitors. Pretty hostile ones, unless the FBI has gotten a lot more aggressive since the last time I checked. I take it they're friendly. About a dozen agents in suits, looking very official. Their boss says she knows you. Rodriguez. Samantha smiled. Agent Rodriguez was her contact in the Singapore operation. Tell her I'll be there in 10 minutes. And Elizabeth, brew some coffee. This is going to be a long morning. The scene at Murphy's Diner was almost surreal. FBI agents mingled with Iron Wolves members. Deputies chatted with the ghost team operators who had changed into civilian clothes. And Elizabeth moved through it all with her signature pots of coffee and plates of apple pie. Commander Mitchell Rodriguez greeted her with a professional nod, or should I say retired commander, who somehow exposed a multinational criminal enterprise from a small-town diner. Just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Rodriguez smiled. Yeah, Samantha replied, and I suppose the highly trained operators who helped take down Richard's organization just happened to be passing through. Or that the Iron Wolves MC is actually a cover for former Special Forces operators. Jackson, who had just entered, chuckled. Ma'am, sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight. Nobody looks twice at another motorcycle club. We've been tracking Richard for years, Rodriguez continued, spreading files on the counter. Never could get close enough. Then you show up, start trouble with a local gang, and within a week, his whole operation collapses. Care to explain that? Samantha accepted a cup of coffee from Elizabeth. Sometimes bullies need to learn they picked the wrong target, Samantha said. The list you sent, it's caused a firestorm. Criminal networks around the world are scrambling. Corrupt officials are resigning. We have enough evidence to take down organizations we didn't even know existed. Brody joined them, looking weary but satisfied. Thompson and the council are singing like canaries. Turns out they've been on Richard's payroll for years, helping him set up shell companies, looking the other way while he built his operation. What about the Steel Serpent? Samantha asked. Most of the members are in custody, Isabella reported. Jake and his inner circle tried to make a run for the county line, but the Iron Wolves intercepted them. They're feeling talkative too, especially after we showed them the evidence Elizabeth collected. Elizabeth smiled innocently. It's amazing what people will say when they think the old diner owner isn't paying attention. Rodriguez shook his head in admiration. A Navy commander, a motorcycle club full of ex-special forces, a deputy, and a diner owner with a secret ledger. Sounds like the start of a bad joke. Sometimes the best operations come from the most unlikely alliances, Samantha replied. Speaking of operations, Rodriguez lowered his voice. Your ghost team, any chance they'd be interested in more work? We have other criminal enterprises that could use their attention. You'd have to ask them, Samantha smiled. If you can find them. The ghost team operators had vanished, leaving no trace of their presence. They had returned to their lives until the next time they were needed. That was their way. Through the diner window, Samantha could see Port Haven coming back to life. The morning sun revealed some of the damage from last night's battle, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. More importantly, she saw the townspeople walking the streets without fear, heads held high. What happens now? Elizabeth asked, refilling coffee cups. Now, Brody said, we rebuild. Proper law enforcement, legitimate business, doing things the right way. Got calls from neighboring towns, Jackson added. Seems word's getting around about what happened here. Other communities are dealing with similar problems, looking for help. Samantha raised an eyebrow. Looking for help or looking for hope? Both, probably, Isabella replied. People need to know they can stand up to bullies, that they don't have to live in fear. And if they need more than just hope? Rodriguez asked pointedly. Samantha looked around the diner at Elizabeth's quiet resilience, Cooper's dedication, Martinez's determination, Jackson's professionalism, a team that had come together by chance but had proven more effective than any official task force. Then they'll find it, she said finally. One way or another. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mike. Satellite tracking shows similar operations setting up in 3 other coastal towns. Ghost team is standing by if needed. Samantha smiled. The fight wasn't over, it had just begun, but this time she wasn't facing it alone. She had a team, a purpose, and a home worth protecting. Elizabeth, she called, you better stock up on coffee. Something tells me your diner is about to get busy. Elizabeth winked. Honey, my coffee pot is always ready, and my ledger has plenty of empty pages. After all, someone has to keep track of what really happens in these small towns. Outside, the storm had completely passed, leaving a sky as clear as Samantha's conscience. Richard and his operation were finished, but more importantly, Port Haven had found its strength. The town would never be the same, it would be better. 3 months after the takedown of Richard's operation, Murphy's Diner was busier than ever. The basement, once a simple storage space, had been converted into what Elizabeth jokingly called the Situation Room, a safe meeting place for Samantha and her growing network of allies. Samantha sat at her usual table reviewing reports from Jackson's team about suspicious activity along the coast. Martinez, now officially appointed as the new sheriff after Brody's retirement, joined her with fresh coffee. Something interesting came in, Isabella said, sliding a file across the table. Remember those warehouse raids last week? Found documents linking 3 state officials to Richard's old network. They've been scrambling ever since the list went public. Samantha's attention shifted to the TV mounted in the corner, showing another high-profile arrest. A weapons dealer with ties to Richard was taken down in a neighboring state by unidentified operators. She smiled, recognizing the ghost team's handiwork. Your friends have been busy, Isabella remarked. What friends? I only see effective law enforcement at work, Samantha replied. The diner door jingled as Brody walked in with Jackson and Rodriguez, all looking serious. What's the problem? Samantha asked. Rodriguez placed a laptop on the table, projecting surveillance photos. Remember how we thought Richard's operation was just about weapons? Turns out that was just the surface. We found evidence of human trafficking routes using the same corridors as the arms shipments. Brody added, multiple small towns involved. Local officials on the take. Sound familiar? Samantha studied the photos. The pattern was clear. The same methods Richard had used were now being employed by others trying to fill the power vacuum. How many towns? She asked. At least 6 that we know of, Jackson replied. All small, isolated, vulnerable, just like Port Haven was. Elizabeth appeared with more coffee and her infamous apple pie. Sounds like someone should do something about that. Already happening, Rodriguez said. A federal task force is being assembled, very unofficial, very deniable. They're looking for someone to coordinate operations on the ground. Samantha raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, you put in a good word? Actually, Jackson interjected, we all did. The Iron Wolves need direction for their more specialized operations. The Ghost team works better with a familiar command, and having a sheriff's special advisor provides useful cover. Plus, Elizabeth added, you need something to do between teaching those self-defense classes. The classes were Samantha's idea, empowering the townspeople to protect themselves, building confidence and community. The waiting list was now 3 months long. What about here? Samantha asked. This town still needs protection, Isabella smiled. We've learned a few things. Besides, you won't be far, just expanding the definition of home territory. Samantha's phone buzzed with a message from Mike. Movement on those trafficking rings. Very urgent. Team is standing by for your call. She looked around the diner at Elizabeth's quiet strength, Martinez's determined leadership, Cooper's steady wisdom, Jackson's tactical professionalism, Rodriguez's official support, all part of something bigger. A network dedicated to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. You know what the real problem with Richard and operations like his is? Samantha said, studying the surveillance photos. They prey on towns like Port Haven because they think small communities are weak. They mistake kindness for weakness, quiet for cowardice. Elizabeth added, pouring more coffee, exactly. Richard thought he could control this town through fear and corruption. He never understood that true strength doesn't come from having the most guns or the most money. It comes from people standing together. Samantha continued, and that's exactly what we're going to show them. Richard thought he could walk all over us because we're a small town. He forgot that small towns are built on community, Isabella finished. On people who take care of each other. Samantha's phone buzzed again, this time a message from the Ghost team leader. Team assembled, multiple targets identified, awaiting your orders. Outside, a group of Iron Wolves rode past on patrol. Their presence was now a comfort to the townspeople rather than a source of fear. Through the diner window, Samantha could see Port Haven thriving. Businesses were reopening, families strolled without fear. The community was coming back stronger than ever. You know what I learned in the Navy, Samantha said, looking at her team, the most effective operations aren't always about having the biggest force or the most advanced equipment. Sometimes it's about having the right people in the right place, working together for the right reasons. And now other towns need the same lesson, Rodriguez added. Samantha nodded. Richard and his people thought small towns were easy targets. They were wrong about Port Haven, and we're going to make sure they're wrong about the others too. Expanding operations will be complicated, Jackson cautioned. We'll need more resources, more coordination. He grinned. Good thing we have a diner with a secure basement, he smiled, and plenty of coffee. And good thing we have people who know how to move in the shadows, Isabella added, nodding towards where a Ghost team member sat quietly in the corner, blending perfectly with the morning crowd. Samantha's phone lit up with more messages. Mike, satellite coverage confirmed for the next operation. Ghost team lead in position at 3 locations. Jackson, Iron Wolves ready to move. Rodriguez, federal backup is awaiting orders off the books. All right, Samantha said, opening her laptop. Let's see what we know about these towns. Let's give them the same chance we gave Port Haven. Elizabeth placed a fresh slice of pie in front of her. Just remember, honey, no matter how far you roam, you always have a base here, and my coffee pot is always on, and my ledger has plenty of empty pages, she added with a wink. Samantha smiled. The fight wasn't over, it was evolving, growing stronger, but now she had something she'd never had before, a real team, a clear purpose, and a home worth fighting for. Richard thought he was building an empire, but he had really helped create something much stronger, a network of dedicated people protecting the vulnerable and standing up to bullies wherever they appeared. All right, Samantha said to her team, let's get to work. We have a few towns to save. The sun was setting over Port Haven when Mike's urgent alert came through. Major operation forming in Cedar Grove. Pattern matches Richard's playbook. Multiple hostiles converging, local law enforcement compromised. Samantha studied the satellite images Mike had sent. Cedar Grove was 3 hours north, another small coastal town much like Port Haven, population 5,000, isolated, vulnerable, the perfect target for criminal enterprises looking to establish new territory. What do we know? Samantha asked in the emergency meeting at Murphy's basement. Rodriguez pulled up files on the screen. The town has seen a spike in criminal activity over the past month, Rodriguez said. A motorcycle gang called the Night Raiders moved in first, starting with the usual protection rackets. Now we're seeing the same signs we saw here. Corrupt officials, suspicious port activity, unexplained wealth. They're following Richard's blueprint exactly. Jackson observed, using the gang as a cover while they set up the real operation. Isabella pointed to surveillance photos. These aren't your average gang members. Look at the way they move. Professional military training. They're using the Night Raiders just like Richard used the Steel Serpent. Local resistance? Samantha asked. Some, Brody replied. The sheriff there is clean but isolated. The mayor is in the Raiders' pocket. The town is divided, scared, just like we were. Elizabeth, who had been quietly taking notes, spoke up. Got a call from a diner owner there. Mary Prescott. She's been gathering evidence just like I did. Says things are coming to a head. They're moving something big through the port tomorrow night. Samantha's phone buzzed again. Ghost Team Lead, Vanguard is in position, confirming heavy enemy presence. At least 40 operators, well-equipped. They're expecting resistance. Good, Samantha said. Let's give them more than they expect. Jackson, Iron Wolves can be ready in 2 hours. 15 riders, all veterans, Samantha said. Martinez, I can spare 6 deputies, all trained in the new protocols, Samantha said. Rodriguez, unofficial federal support as always, and I have 3 teams of agents who would love to be in the right place at the right time, Samantha said. Samantha nodded, forming a plan. They're expecting conventional resistance, local law enforcement, maybe rival gangs. We give them what they're looking for, let them think they have everything under control. Meanwhile, the ghost team hits them from the shadows, Samantha said. Brody finished. Exactly. Elizabeth, get in touch with Mary, tell her to be ready but stay safe. Her evidence will be crucial later, Samantha said. Already done, honey, Elizabeth replied. She's smarter than they think, just like someone I know. Samantha spread out the map of Cedar Grove. They have numbers and equipment, but we have something better. Experience. We know their playbook because we've seen it before. More importantly, we know how to beat it. Her phone lit up with messages from her team. Mike, satellite coverage confirmed, full surveillance package. Ghost Team Lead, target packages identified, awaiting orders. Jackson, Iron Wolves are moving, ETA 3 hours. Martinez, deputies moving, using civilian vehicles. Remember, Samantha told her team, these people think small towns are easy targets. They think they can walk in, bribe a few officials, intimidate the locals, and take control. They're about to learn the same lesson Richard did. Sometimes the most dangerous threat isn't the one you see coming. Speaking of lessons, Elizabeth added, Mary said the Night Raiders have been pressuring local businesses, pushing people around. Sounds like they need a reminder about picking the wrong target. Samantha smiled. Then let's give them a reminder they won't forget. The next few hours were a flurry of activity behind the scenes. The Iron Wolves departed in small groups, taking different routes to avoid attention. Isabella's deputies moved, disguised as civilian traffic. The ghost team reported final positions around Cedar Grove. Even Elizabeth's network of diner owners along the coast had been activated, providing safe houses and gathering intelligence. As Samantha prepared for the operation, she looked around the basement at her core team. What had started as a simple act of standing up to bullies had evolved into something much larger. A dedicated unit specializing in protecting small towns from those who would prey on them. Remember Port Haven, she told them. Remember what it felt like to be afraid, to think you were alone against something too big to fight. Cedar Grove feels the same way right now. Tonight we show them they're not alone. We show them that small towns can fight back. Her phone buzzed one last time. Multiple vehicles approaching Cedar Grove, heavy weapons, professional operators. Whatever they're planning is happening soon. Good, Samantha replied, because so are we. Rodriguez checked his weapons. You know, when I was assigned to investigate Richard's operation, I never expected to become part of a secret task force protecting small towns. Life has a funny way of working out like that. Elizabeth said, handing out fresh coffee and travel mugs. Sometimes you find your true calling in the last place you expect. Let's move out, Samantha ordered. Ghost team is in position. Iron wolves are approaching the target. Isabella's deputies are in place. It's time to show these people why you don't underestimate small towns. As they moved out, Samantha thought about what had changed since that morning in Murphy's diner when two bikers thought they could intimidate a woman quietly drinking coffee. They had started a chain of events that would reshape not just Port Haven, but small towns all along the coast. Ready to make some new bullies regret their life choices? Isabella asked, checking her tactical gear. Samantha chambered a round in her weapon, more than ready. Let's go teach the night raiders why you should always be careful who you pick a fight with. Outside, engines roared as the team prepared to move out. The night was clear, the stars shining brightly over Port Haven. Somewhere to the north, Cedar Grove was about to learn they weren't alone in their fight, and those trying to take over their town were about to learn a harsh lesson about underestimating small towns and the people who protect them. The approach to Cedar Grove was executed with military precision. Samantha's team moved in phases, carefully avoiding drawing attention. The Ghost Team operators had mapped the night raiders' patrol routes and security positions, identifying weak points in their defenses. Ghost Team lead status, Samantha whispered into her radio as they neared the town limits. Enemy forces concentrated around the port area. Main group appears to be preparing for a major shipment. Secondary force patrolling downtown. They've surrounded the sheriff's office. Confirmed, Jackson added. My recon reports heavy weapons, professional operators mixed with gang members. They're expecting trouble but looking in the wrong direction. Samantha checked the satellite feed on her tablet. The night raiders had set up checkpoints on all the main roads into town, but they had left the old logging trails unguarded. Amateur mistake. Martinez, are your people in position? Samantha asked. Affirmative. Deputies are spread throughout the town, all in civilian cover, ready to move on your signal, Isabella replied. Rodriguez, FBI teams are standing by, unofficial as always, disguised as fishing boats offshore. They'll move in when we have evidence of criminal activity, Rodriguez said. Samantha's phone lit up with a message from Mary Prescott, the local diner owner. A large group just arrived, all armed, trying to keep a low profile. Their leaders are meeting with the mayor in my back room. Have the recorder running like Elizabeth showed me. Good girl, Elizabeth remarked, monitoring communications from the mobile command center they had set up in a converted RV. She has nerves of steel, that one. Samantha studied the tactical screen. The night raiders had turned Cedar Grove into a fortress, but they were making the same mistake Richard had made. They were preparing for a conventional assault, not understanding that the greatest threat would come from within. All units, execute Phase 1, Samantha ordered. Across Cedar Grove, carefully planned distractions began. The Iron Wolves launched their signature noisy approach from the east, drawing attention. Isabella's deputies, positioned in civilian vehicles, created a traffic jam at the main checkpoint. The Ghost Team operators triggered false alarms at several warehouses. They're dividing their forces, Jackson reported. Just like Port Haven. Samantha watched through her scope as the enemy commanders struggled to coordinate their response. Their radio communications, intercepted by Mike's equipment, revealed growing confusion. Unidentified bikers approaching from the east, a voice crackled. Multiple civilian vehicles blocking Route 1, possible break-in at Warehouse 3, no, Warehouse 5. Wait, alarms going off at all locations. They're losing control of their perimeter, Jackson observed with satisfaction. Samantha keyed her radio. Phase 2, Ghost Team, you are authorized to engage designated targets. Jackson, begin your assault. Martinez, light them up. The real attack began with surgical precision. The Ghost Team operators eliminated key enemy commanders with suppressed weapons. The Iron Wolves' distraction turned into a real assault on the Night Raiders' outer defenses. Isabella's deputies emerged from their civilian cover, targeting specific enemies identified by their intelligence. Mary reports the leaders are panicking, Elizabeth relayed. He's trying to call for reinforcements, but our jammers are blocking communications. Perfect timing for Phase 3, Samantha moved forward with her personal team, a mix of Ghost Team operators and Iron Wolves veterans. They were heading for the port facility where, according to their intelligence, the Night Raiders were preparing to receive a large shipment. The Ghost Team leader's voice was tight with controlled excitement. You need to see this. Northwest Warehouse, main storage area. Samantha changed direction to the warehouse, moving silently through the chaos of battle. Inside the warehouse, she found what the Night Raiders had been hiding. Dozens of shipping containers, each filled with weapons, drugs, and detailed ledgers of criminal activity. Just like Richard, she muttered. They're not just taking over the town, they're setting up a distribution hub. Samantha's voice broke in urgently. We have movement at the diner. The leader is trying to escape. Negative. Samantha switched channels. Ghost Teams 3 and 4 converge on Murphy's diner. Jackson cut off their escape routes. Elizabeth, get Mary out of there. The Night Raiders leader only made it 3 steps out the back door of the diner before finding himself surrounded by Ghost Team operators. The mayor, trying to slip away in the confusion, was apprehended by Isabella's deputies. Commander, Rodriguez called, we have enough evidence. FBI teams are moving in. Samantha watched as the carefully constructed operation collapsed. The Night Raiders, their leadership eliminated and their plans in disarray, began to surrender. The professional operators, realizing they had been outmaneuvered, tried to flee but found every escape route blocked, just like Port Haven. They never saw it coming, Brody observed over the radio. Because they made the same mistake, Samantha replied. They thought they could take over a small town through fear and intimidation. They never understood that small towns have a strength all their own. As the sun rose over Cedar Grove, the full extent of their victory became clear. The Night Raiders were in custody, their criminal enterprise exposed, corrupt officials were being arrested, and most importantly, the townspeople were emerging from their homes, realizing they were finally free. Mary is serving free coffee to everyone, Elizabeth reported with satisfaction. Says it's a new day for Cedar Grove. Samantha smiled, recalling similar scenes in Port Haven months ago. Make sure she knows she's not alone anymore. No small town is alone when we're around. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mike, similar pattern detected in 3 other coastal towns. Ghost Team is standing by. Looks like our work isn't done, Isabella observed. Samantha checked her weapons, already thinking about the next operation. It's never really over, but that's okay. Someone has to stand up for these towns and remind the bullies why they should be careful who they pick a fight with, Elizabeth added. Exactly, Samantha agreed, watching the FBI boats approach the harbor. Because sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one with the biggest gang or the most weapons. Sometimes, Elizabeth finished, it's the quiet woman drinking coffee in a small town diner, just waiting for someone to make a mistake. 6 months after the takedown of Richard's operation, Samantha's network had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. The basement of Murphy's diner had become the nerve center for operations protecting small towns along the coast. Elizabeth's intelligence wall had expanded to include maps, photos, and evidence gathered from numerous operations. We have movement, Isabella announced, stepping into the underground command center. Remember those shipping manifests we found in Cedar Grove? Just match them to activity at Millbrookport. Samantha looked up from her tactical screen. That fishing town? What's the pattern? Samantha asked. Same as Port Haven and Cedar Grove. A small gang moves in first, starts pushing people around, then the professionals arrive, looking to set up shipping operations. Jackson, who had been monitoring communications, added to his report. The gang calls themselves the Harbor Kings. Local law enforcement is compromised. The mayor's son just bought a new yacht he couldn't possibly afford. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore, Brody observed. Like they're following a playbook, Samantha said. Exactly, Rodriguez confirmed, spreading out the new files. We identified a pattern after we shut down Richard's operation. His associates scattered, each now trying to rebuild his empire piece by piece. Small towns, corrupt officials, legitimate businesses as fronts. Samantha's phone buzzed with an update from the Ghost Team leader. Surveillance confirms heavy weapons shipments moving through Millbrookport. Professional security teams in place. They're building something big. How many times do they have to learn? Elizabeth wondered, pouring fresh coffee. Small towns aren't easy targets anymore. They haven't learned yet, Samantha replied. They still think Port Haven and Cedar Grove were flukes. They don't understand what they're really up against. Isabella pulled up satellite imagery. The ghost team has identified 3 main compounds the Harbor Kings are using. Old fishing warehouses as cover. The local sheriff has been ordered to stay away, just like Thompson did here, Brody noted. Difference is, Jackson added, we know their moves now. We can stay one step ahead. Samantha's phone lit up with a series of messages. Mike, facial recognition matches 3 former associates of Richard in Millbrook. Ghost team lead, target packages are ready, teams in position. Iron Wolves reconning the port. Patrols are bought and paid for, no official response imminent. They think they're being clever, Samantha said, studying the intel. Using the same methods that worked for Richard, thinking lightning can't strike 3 times. Want to prove them wrong? Isabella asked, checking her tactical gear. Not yet, Samantha pulled up more satellite imagery. Look at their patrol patterns. They're expecting resistance from local law enforcement or rival gangs, just like the others. They're preparing for the wrong kind of fight. Elizabeth approached with a fresh pot of coffee and a knowing smile. Got a call from the local diner owner in Millbrook. Says the Harbor Kings have been pressuring businesses, making examples of anyone who resists. Reminds me of some other bullies we've dealt with. History repeats itself, Brody mused. No, Samantha corrected, history teaches a lesson these people refuse to learn. Rodriguez checked his secure phone. FBI teams are ready, unofficial as usual. Ghost team in position? Samantha asked. Affirmative, Jackson replied. 6 operators are spread out in key locations. They've mapped every patrol route, identified all security weaknesses. Iron Wolves, Jackson grinned, 20 riders ready to raise hell on your command. Martinez, 10 deputies, all veterans of Cedar Grove. They know the playbook. Samantha stood up, addressing her assembled team. These people think they're smart, following Richard's methods. They don't realize that's exactly why they're going to fail. We know their moves before they make them, we know their weaknesses before they're exposed. She tapped the main tactical screen, displaying the layout of Millbrook Port. They're expecting conventional threats, local police, rival gangs, maybe federal investigation. What they're not expecting is us, a ghost team that can strike from anywhere, Iron Wolves who know how to fight smarter, not just harder, deputies trained in our methods, and most importantly, a network of small towns ready to stand together. Elizabeth added new intel from her diner network. Rumors are they're moving something big tomorrow night, a kind of showcase to show other towns what happens if they resist. Perfect timing, Samantha smiled. Let's show them what happens when they mess with the wrong towns. She checked her gear as her team prepared to deploy. Remember Port Haven, she told them, remember Cedar Grove, remember every small town these people think they can control through fear and corruption. Tonight we add Millbrook to that list. Her phone buzzed one last time. Mike, multiple hostiles converging on Millbrook. Whatever they're planning is big. Good, Samantha replied, so is our response. As her team moved out, Samantha thought about that morning in Murphy's diner when 2 bikers thought they could intimidate their way to control. They had started something they never anticipated, a network dedicated to protecting small towns from those who would prey on them. Ready to teach some new bullies an old lesson? Isabella asked, checking her weapons. Samantha chambered a round in her rifle. Always ready. Let's show the Harbor Kings why smart predators avoid small towns these days. Outside, engines roared as the team prepared to move out. The night was clear, perfect for their operation. Somewhere out there, the Harbor Kings thought they were about to demonstrate their power. Instead, they were about to become another example of why you should never underestimate small towns or the silent warriors who protect them. Elizabeth, Samantha called back as they prepared to leave, keep the coffee hot. Something tells me we'll need it when we get back. Always do, honey, Elizabeth smiled, and I've got a fresh ledger ready for Millbrook's story. Something tells me it's going to be a good one. The approach to Millbrook Port was made in absolute silence under the cover of night. Samantha's team moved into position while the ghost team operators infiltrated key locations throughout the port facility. Through her night vision goggles, Samantha could see the Harbor King's security patrols moving with the misplaced confidence of those who think they're untouchable. Ghost team lead status, Samantha whispered into her radio. All targets marked, enemy force is significantly larger than anticipated. Counting over 50 operators, excellent military-grade equipment. They're planning something big. Jackson's voice came over the radio. Confirmed. My recon reports heavy weapons being moved into position around the harbor. They're fortifying for something. Samantha studied the thermal images on her tactical screen. The Harbor Kings had turned 3 warehouses into fortified compounds with professional security teams guarding what appeared to be a massive arms cache. Martinez, are your people in position? Samantha asked. Affirmative. Deputies are embedded throughout the town, ready on your signal, Isabella replied. Rodriguez, FBI teams are in position, disguised as fishing boats. We have the harbor covered, Rodriguez said. Samantha's phone lit up with a message from Helen, the local diner owner. Big meeting happening right now. Harbor King's leadership is all present. They're planning some kind of showcase tomorrow, something about making an example. Elizabeth's voice came over the command channel. Just like they did in Port Haven. They always start with a show of force. Samantha watched through her scope as more vehicles arrived at the main warehouse. The Harbor Kings were gathering their full force, preparing to demonstrate their power to the town, just like Richard had tried, just like the Night Raiders had attempted in Cedar Grove. All units, execute Phase 1, Samantha ordered. Across Millbrook Port, a carefully orchestrated chaos erupted. The Iron Wolves launched diversionary attacks from multiple directions. Isabella's deputies, disguised as local traffic, created strategic gridlocks. The Ghost Team operators triggered the port's emergency systems, sowing confusion among the enemy forces. They're splitting their response, the Ghost Team leader reported. Security teams are breaking formation, just as predicted. Samantha watched through her thermal scope as the enemy commanders struggled to coordinate their forces. Their radio communications, intercepted by Mike's equipment, revealed growing panic. Multiple break-ins reported, a voice cracked. Unidentified bikers to the north. Losing contact with outside teams. They're losing control, Jackson observed. Just like the others, Samantha keyed her radio. Execute Phase 2. Ghost Team, you are authorized to engage designated targets. Jackson, begin your assault. Martinez, light them up. The real attack hit the Harbor Kings from all directions. The Ghost Team operators eliminated key leaders with surgical precision. The Iron Wolves' diversion turned into a devastating assault on their defensive positions. Isabella's deputies emerged from their cover, targeting specific enemies based on their intelligence. Helen reports their leadership is trying to escape, Elizabeth relayed. They're heading for emergency boats. Negative, Samantha replied. Ghost Teams 3 and 4 cut off their escape route. Jackson, block the marina. Rodriguez, time to bring your teams in. The Harbor Kings leaders made it halfway to their escape boats before finding themselves surrounded by Ghost Team operators. Their professional security teams, realizing they'd been outmaneuvered, tried to establish a defensive line but found themselves caught between the Iron Wolves and the FBI assault teams. The Ghost Team leader's voice was urgent. You need to see what's in the main warehouse. Samantha moved quickly through the chaos of battle, entering the warehouse through a side entrance. Inside, she found what the Harbor Kings had been preparing, enough weapons and ammunition to equip a small army, along with detailed plans to take over other coastal towns. Just like we thought, she muttered. They were planning to expand. Samantha Isabella's voice broke in urgently. We have movement at City Hall. Looks like some officials are trying to quietly disappear. Ghost Teams 5 and 6 intercept. No one leaves town until we confirm their involvement. The battle for Millbrook Port lasted less than an hour, but its impact would be felt for years to come. The Harbor Kings, their leadership captured and their operations exposed, crumbled completely. Their professional security teams, realizing they were outmatched, surrendered to the FBI forces. As dawn broke over the harbor, Samantha watched as federal agents processed the scene. Local residents who had lived in fear for months emerged to witness the liberation of their town. Just like Port Haven, Brody observed over the radio. They never learn, Samantha corrected, they only learn the wrong lessons. They see towns like this as weak, isolated, they never understand that small communities have a strength all their own. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mike, similar operations identified in 2 other coastal towns. Ghost Team ready to deploy. Looks like we're not done yet, Isabella noted. Samantha checked her weapons, already thinking about the next operation. We're never done as long as there are people who think they can prey on small towns. We'll be here to prove them wrong and remind them, Elizabeth added over the radio, that sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one with the biggest gang or the most guns. Sometimes. Samantha agreed, watching the sun rise over Millbrook Port. It's the quiet ones, the ones who decide that enough is enough, the ones who stand up and fight back. Around her, the town was coming back to life. The Harbor Kings were gone, their attempt to build a criminal empire shattered like the ones who had tried before them. And somewhere out there, other towns were waiting, needing the same help, the same hope that Port Haven had found. Ready to save another town? Isabella asked, checking her gear. Samantha smiled, thinking about that morning in Murphy's diner that seemed so long ago. Always ready? Because someone has to remind these bullies why they should be careful who they pick a fight with and why, Elizabeth added, they should always think twice before causing trouble in a small town. A year after the confrontation that had started it all in Murphy's diner, Samantha stood at her usual table by the window watching the morning mist roll in from the ocean. The town had changed in ways she had never expected. Port Haven had become something bigger than just a quiet coastal community. It had become a symbol of hope for small towns everywhere. Elizabeth approached with fresh coffee, just like she had that fateful morning. "A penny for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about how it all started," Samantha replied. Two bikers thinking they could intimidate a diner owner and finding a substitute Navy commander instead. Elizabeth smiled, though I suspect they won't be the last ones to make that mistake. Samantha's phone buzzed with the morning intelligence summary from Mike. In the past year, their network had disrupted criminal operations in 12 coastal towns, dismantled 3 major smuggling rings, and exposed dozens of corrupt officials. The Ghost Team had become a legend in the criminal underworld, an unseen force striking without warning, protecting small communities from those who would prey on them. "Something interesting came in," Isabella said, sliding into the booth, now a seasoned sheriff herself, having helped train law enforcement in other towns, teaching them how to fight corruption and stand up to intimidation. "Remember those files we found in Millbrookport? They finally cracked the code." "What did you find?" Samantha asked. "Names, dates, locations." Turns out Richard wasn't just building a criminal empire, he created a blueprint, a way for others to systematically target and take over small towns, Isabella replied. Jackson walked into the diner, followed by Brody and Rodriguez. The Iron Wolves leader looked grim. "That explains what we've been seeing all along the coast. Different groups, same playbook." "They're learning," Jackson said. Rodriguez added, spreading surveillance photos on the table. "After what happened here, in Cedar Grove and Millbrookport, they're being more careful, operating in smaller groups, moving around, but still targeting small towns." Brody observed, "Still thinking they can control communities through fear and corruption." Samantha studied the photos. The pattern was clear. Criminal organizations were adapting their methods but still underestimating the strength of small communities, still making the same fundamental mistake that Richard and the Steel Serpents had made. "They're not the only ones who have learned," Samantha said. "Every town we help becomes stronger, every community that stands up becomes an example for others." Her phone lit up with more messages. Ghost Team Lead, new activity detected in 3 coastal locations. Iron Wolves, recon reports suspicious movement in northern harbor towns. Mike, satellite shows pattern matching Richard's blueprint. Elizabeth refreshed their coffee cups. "Looks like some people still need to learn the hard way. They never understand," Isabella said. "They see small towns as easy targets, they never expect to find people like us waiting for them. That's their biggest mistake." Samantha replied, "They think they can walk into any small town, flex their muscles, and take control. They never realize that these communities have a strength all their own, protectors of their own." Rodriguez checked his secure phone. "The FBI has been tracking a surge in criminal activity along the coast. They're organizing, sharing resources." "Good," Jackson grinned, "makes them easier to find." Samantha stood up, moving to the window. Outside, Port Haven was alive with morning activity. Families strolled without fear, businesses thrived, and the community had grown stronger than ever. The Steel Serpents were gone, their attempt at a takeover now just a story told in Elizabeth's ledger. "You know what the real difference is between us and them?" Samantha asked, "besides the fact that we're the good guys?" Isabella quipped, "They see small towns as targets, we see them as home. They think they can control communities through fear. We know that true strength comes from people standing together." Her phone buzzed again. "Helen from Millbrookport, strange bikers in town, new gang trying to move in. Remember how you helped us?" Samantha asked. "It never really ends, does it?" Brody observed. "Doesn't have to," Samantha replied. "As long as there are people who think they can prey on small towns, we'll be here to prove them wrong." Elizabeth appeared with a fresh pot of coffee and her infamous apple pie. "So I guess we should refuel. Sounds like we have more bullies who need to learn some manners." "You know what I've learned this past year?" Samantha said, looking at her team. "That morning when those bikers walked in, they thought they were just picking on a lone woman in a diner. They never realized they were starting something much bigger." "A network," Isabella added. "A mission," Jackson continued. "A family," Elizabeth finished. Samantha's phone lit up with final confirmation from the Ghost Team leader. "Teams in position at all 3 locations, awaiting your orders." She looked around at her unlikely family, the diner owner who had started it all, the sheriff who had found her courage, the Iron Wolves leader who had become a trusted ally, the FBI agent who chose to fight from the shadows. and all the others who had joined their cause. So, Samantha said, checking her weapons, let's go remind some people why you should always be careful who you pick a fight with in small towns and why, Elizabeth added with a wink, they should always think twice before causing trouble in a small town wink. The quiet woman drinking coffee might be the most dangerous person in the room. Outside, engines roared as the team prepared to move out. Somewhere along the coast, other small towns were waiting, needing help, needing hope, waiting for someone to show them they weren't alone, and Samantha's team would be there, just like they had been ever since that morning when two bikers had made a mistake that changed everything. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over Port Haven as Samantha sat at her usual table at Murphy's Diner, finishing up the day's reports. A year had passed since those first two bikers had walked in looking for trouble. Now, the diner's basement command center coordinated operations protecting small towns up and down the coast while Elizabeth's coffee and pie fueled the planning of complex tactical missions. Message from the Ghost team leader, Samantha announced to her assembled team. Last night's operation in Harbor Bay was a resounding success. Criminal network neutralized, corrupt officials apprehended, community protected. So that's 15 towns liberated, Isabella counted, marking locations on their tactical map. Not bad for a year's work, starting right here, Elizabeth smiled, refilling coffee cups with two bikers who picked the wrong target. Samantha's phone buzzed with the latest intelligence update from Mike. Criminal organizations are adapting. They're avoiding small coastal towns, now looking for easier targets inland. They're learning, Brody observed. They're running scared, Jackson corrected. Word's getting around in the underworld, small towns aren't easy targets anymore, not with the Ghost team out there, not with us watching. Rodriguez walked into the diner, carrying new intelligence files. We're seeing a significant drop in organized crime along the coast. They're calling it the small town effect. Criminal organizations are warning each other to avoid communities like Port Haven because they never know. Isabella grinned when the quiet woman drinking coffee might be a Navy commander. Samantha studied the latest reports. The changes were impressive. Criminal networks that once saw small towns as easy prey were now avoiding them altogether. The blueprint Richard had created, the one that had inspired so many others, was now being used to teach criminals where not to go. You know what real victory is? Samantha asked, looking around at her team. It's not just about the towns we've helped, it's about the ones we didn't have to, the communities that were never targeted because the criminals were too afraid. Elizabeth placed her worn ledger on the table, the one that had started it all. Got a call from a diner owner in Mountain View. Says some bikers were causing trouble, trying to pressure local businesses, but the strangest thing happened. What's that? Samantha asked, though she already knew the answer. The bikers got a phone call. Right after that, they disappeared. Apparently someone told them about what happened here, about what happens to those who pick a fight in small towns these days. Jackson chuckled. Reputation is a powerful thing. Samantha's phone lit up with one final series of messages. Ghost team lead, all areas secure, no hostile activity detected. Mike, satellite shows criminal activity moving away from coastal regions. Iron Wolves recon routes are quiet, they've learned to stay away. So what now? Isabella asked. With the coast secure, should we shut down operations? Samantha stood up, moving to the window where she had sat that fateful morning. Outside, Port Haven was peaceful, but somewhere out there, other communities might need their help, need to learn the lessons that had started here. We adapt, she said finally, just like they do. We stay ready, stay vigilant, because somewhere, someone will eventually forget the lessons we've taught here. They'll think they've found an easy target, a quiet town they can control through fear and intimidation. And when they do, they'll learn the same lesson the Steel Serpents learned, the same lesson we've taught every criminal organization that's tried to prey on small towns. Brody asked, that sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one with the biggest gang or the most guns. Sometimes. Elizabeth added, serving a final round of coffee, it's the quiet ones, the ones who decide that enough is enough, the ones who stand up and show others how to fight back. Samantha looked at her unlikely family, the diner owner who had become their heart, the sheriff who had found her courage, the Iron Wolves who had become protectors, the Ghost team who struck from the shadows, and all the others who had joined their cause. You know what those first two bikers really did? She asked. When they walked in here, thinking they could intimidate a small town. What's that? Isabella asked. They didn't just pick a fight with the wrong person, they helped create something they never anticipated, a network of dedicated people protecting small towns, standing up to bullies and criminals who think they can prey on quiet communities. Her phone buzzed one last time, a message from Helen in Millbrookport. Thank you, our town is strong, we're helping protect others just like you protected us. Outside, the sun set over Port Haven, casting a golden light on the peaceful streets. In diners and small towns all along the coast, people lived their lives without fear, knowing they weren't alone anymore, knowing that somewhere a woman quietly drinking coffee was watching, ready to remind anyone who had forgotten why you should always be careful who you pick a fight with in small towns. Because sometimes, Samantha thought, watching the last rays of daylight fade, the biggest mistakes lead to the most important changes, and sometimes the worst decision a bully can make is to walk into a small-town diner, thinking they've found an easy target. After all, you never know who might be sitting there quietly drinking coffee, just waiting for someone to make that mistake. Sarah has proven that courage and determination can change everything. Those two bikers thought they could bully anyone, but they picked the wrong person. This story is a reminder that it's not always the strongest who wins, but intelligence, bravery, and justice that determine the outcome. If you were in Sarah's shoes, how would you act? Have you ever faced bullies or stood up for what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might inspire others. If you found this story meaningful, please share it with your friends and family to spread the message of courage and fairness. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories. Thank you for watching. Let's work together to create positive change, because every small action can make a big difference. Wishing you a day full of energy and meaning. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe for the latest updates. These stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared for the purpose of spreading human values and life and have been rewritten with the help of AI. If there are any errors, please ignore them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.